you enjoy Hearthstone, make sure you subscribe. Hearthstone is getting a brand new class known as Death Knight in their new expansion, March of the Lich King. Obviously, a new class is really cool, but let's go into what makes Death Knight so special, as well as a bunch of new cards for this expansion. Let's talk about Death Knight's hero power first, which is Ghoul Charge. This is 2 mana and it summons a 1/1 ghoul with charge that dies at the end of the turn. This works really nicely with Death Knight's other key mechanic, corpses. After a friendly minion dies, you get a corpse, and this will be used as a resource for certain cards that we'll see later in this video. Death Knights are a little bit more nuanced in deck building. You could focus on Blood, Holy, or Frost, and you only have 3 points to give, which means if you want to go for 3 Blood, you totally can, or you can go for 2 Frost, 1 Holy. The choices are up to you. But when it comes to a Death Knight card like Acolyte of Death, you might have noticed this icon under the mana crystal. That means you need to at least have 1 point into Frost in order to actually use that card in your deck. But a card like Army of the Dead needs 2 holy aspects in order for you to run it in your deck. And a card like Vampiric Blood, you will need to put 3 points into Blood in order for you to actually use this card in your deck. So there's trade-offs and there's deck building, which makes Death Knight an extremely interesting class. Start off with the Frost aspect first, which seems to be more of a combo-oriented Death Knight. Acolyte of Death is a 3 mana 3/4 1 Frost aspect. After a friendly undead dies, draw a card. And if you couldn't have guessed, they're adding an undead minion type. The hero power generates an undead ghoul. This card can be really good in order for you to draw your combo pieces quicker. We then have Defrost, a 2 mana 1 Frost aspect spell for Death Knight. Draw a card, spend 2 corpses to draw another. So like I said before, Death Knight have the corpse mechanic. If you have 2 corpses to spend, it will spend them automatically and you will draw another card for 2 mana. Pretty great card considering it's not too hard to get corpses in your pool. And then we have Glacial Advanced, a 3 mana Death Knight spell. Deal 4 damage, your next spell this turn costs 2 less. You can already see the formation of a combo Frost deck for Death Knights. Clearly, if you're going to go for this package, this fits very nicely. For 2 Frost aspect, we have Horn of Winter, 0 mana, refresh 2 mana crystals. This is a really good card to fit in as much damage as possible in 1 turn, and this will definitely help you finish off your opponent. Also at 2 Frost aspect, we have Overseer Frigidera, who is a 6 mana 5/6 legendary. Battle Cry, draw 2 spells. If they're both Frost spells, deal 2 damage to all enemies. I have a feeling that triple Frost will be an archetype, and this deck is going to fit so nicely into that because you're probably going to be running a lot of Frost spells. This is a 6 mana 5/6 to draw 2, and you deal 2 damage to everything. That seems like a pretty good package. It looks like Death Knight already looks pretty strong. And for our 3 Frost aspect card, we have Frostworm's Fury, which is a 7 mana Death Knight spell. Deal 5 damage, freeze all enemy minions, and summon a 5/5 Frostworm. It does a lot for 7 mana, and you can see when you go all in on one aspect, you are rewarded with a pretty big payoff. And this is the case for the other aspects as well. And this is a pretty decent card. It helps you buy a ton of time with a Frost Nova effect. You deal 5 damage and you summon a 5/5. Seems like it's a pretty great card to stall in order for you to get your combo pieces. That's it for Frost. Let's move on to Blood. Blood Death Knight looks to be a little bit more on the control-y side. There is a lot of really strong board clears that we're going to see in these cards, starting off with Obliterate, which is a card from the original Lich King. 2 mana, 1 blood aspect, destroy a minion, your hero takes damage equal to its health. This card is pretty good in a control deck. It's 2 mana to destroy anything, and we already were pretty happy to get Obliterate from the Lich King, so I have a feeling this will see play in some decks. And because it's only 1 blood, it can fit into a variety of different archetypes if you just need some removal. Then we have Patchwork, the legendary shown for the blood aspect in Death Knight. 7 mana 4/6 Battle Cry, destroy a random minion in your opponent's hand, deck, and battlefield. And this is an undead minion. Now, I don't know about you guys, for 7 mana to destroy 3 different minions looks really good. This in itself is just a really good win condition. It's almost like Mutinous, but just a million times better. And God, this card is going to be very fun to play against. And then we have Gnome Muncher, a 6 mana 5/6 with taunt, lifesteal, and at the end of your turn, attack the lowest health enemy. This is also undead. This is a pretty decent minion. It's good to play on an empty board, but it's really good when your opponent has a bunch of low attack minions. You're basically going to be trading 2 for 1, generating a ton of life for your hero so you can win in the late game. Pretty great control card overall. Then we move on to 2 blood aspects needed. We have Blood Boil, 5 mana shadow spell with lifesteal. In fact, all enemy minions minions, at the end of your turns, they take 2 damage. So this is a very powerful effect, especially against a wide board. It is almost at worst a consecration that doesn't hit face, but it does generate you life every time a minion takes damage. This could realistically be a Reno Jackson heal in itself over multiple turns. It feels like a very powerful effect for just stalling the game out long enough so you can get to your late game. And if I had to take a guess, this card might be one of the best cards we've seen so far. We then have Corpse Explosion, another 5 mana spell for Death Knight. Detonate a corpse to deal 1 damage to all minions. If any are still alive, repeat this. With the more friendly minions that have died and the more corpses you have in the bank, this could do a lot of damage and potentially could wipe your opponent's board pretty easily. Again, another really powerful board clear for the blood aspect for Death Knight. Then we have Vampiric Blood, which is the triple blood aspect card. For 2 mana, you give your hero +5 health, spend 3 corpses to gain another 5 more, and draw a card. For 2 mana to gain 5 health, it's not super great, but it does make your maximum health higher. That could be pretty vital if you're going to be healing a ton. But if you do have 3 corpses before you play this, then you get 5 more health and you draw a card. That feels pretty nutty, and you definitely want to use this card when you've had 3 friendly minions die. Overall, Blood looks really, really good. Let's move on to Holy. With the Holy aspect, it really comes down to resurrecting your minions. For 1 Holy aspect, we have Dark Transformation, 2 mana shadow spell, transform an undead into a 4/5 undead monstrosity with Rush. This card doesn't seem super great, but it works really nicely with the hero power. You get the free damage and then you summon a 4/5. And there's a bunch of use cases for this card. We then have Plague Strike, 2 mana shadow spell, deal 3 damage to a minion. If this kills it, summon a 2/2 zombie with Rush. 2 mana to deal 3 damage is okay. Can't even go face with it, but you do get a 2/2 zombie with Rush if you kill a minion. Seems okay-ish. It also is another corpse if you end up getting that zombie, which can be pretty important to your overall win condition. Then we have Graveyard Shift, a 3 mana spell, summon 2 1/1 zombies with Reborn. So Reborn is coming back, and this is a lot of corpses for 3 mana. You can kind of tell with the cards that we've seen from Holy that there will be a huge payoff for having a lot of corpses. So you want to make sure that a lot of stuff actually ends up dying. Speaking of payoffs for corpses, we move on to 2 Holy aspects, which is Army of the Dead. 5 mana spell, raise up to 5 corpses as 2/2 Risen Ghouls with Rush. If you have 3 corpses, let's say you only raise 3, but if you do have 5 corpses to spend, you are getting 10/10 worth of stats with Rush. This could clear a bunch of boards for 5 mana. This was also an older card from the Lich King that was slightly changed. This one seems a little bit more appropriate. I think this card looks pretty great. We have Battlefield Necromancer, a 2 mana 2/3. At the end of your turn, raise a corpse as a 1/2 Risen Footman with Taunt. It's a pretty decent card for the Holy payoff, and will probably be ran if you're looking to make corpses your main win condition. And for the big win condition of Holy with 3 aspects, 8 mana 9/7 Lord Marigar. Battlecry, raise all of your corpses as 1/1 Risen Golems with Rush. For each that can't fit, give 1 +2/+2. So this is your huge payoff for having a ton of corpses, basically a win condition on its own, which is pretty great. It's pretty familiar with Kel'Thuzad that we got in Castle Nathria. This is a good win condition if you feel like you're going to be fighting for the board a ton, and I think this is a pretty cool way to show off the Holy aspect. We also saw cards for Death Knight that has no aspect, which means you don't need to have 1 blood or 1 holy. They could be put into any Death Knight deck. Starting off with Skeletal Sidekick, a 1 mana 1/2 Battlecry, give a friendly undead +2 attack. This card's pretty decent. It works pretty well with the hero power if you just need to do 3 damage to something, and it could be fit into some kind of aggressive Demon Hunter deck. Perfectly fine for a card that can just fit into any Death Knight deck. We also have Icy Touch, which is a 1 mana spell, deal 2 damage to an enemy and freeze it. This can go face. 1 mana to deal 2 is pretty decent. If you compare this to Frostbolt, which has been in the game since, Classic, this feels like it's a pretty great card. Moving on to neutrals, starting with an absolute crazy card, Hearthstone's first neutral legendary called the Sunwell. This is 9 mana. It fills your hand with random spells, and it costs 1 less for each other card in your hand, which means if you don't need a ton of spells, you can play this at a cheaper cost, but if you want the full maximum value, you're going to be spending 9 mana for this. Now, is this card good? I'm not sure, but it's extremely fun to use, and this is also the free legendary card that you can use right now in Hearthstone. Next, we have Invincible. This is the first card that we're going to see that has 2 minion types. This is an Undead Beast. It is an 8 mana 5/5 legendary. Reborn, Battlecry, and Death Rattle. Give a random friendly undead +5/+5 in taunt. If you're playing an undead archetype and you want to make sure that you have a way to buff them a lot, Invincible seems like a pretty great way of doing so. That is a lot of stats for a card. That is +15/+15 for another undead minion. That could win you the game on its own. Pretty picante card. I'm excited to see what people can do with a card like this. We then have Lothamar Theron, a 7-mana 7/7 battle cry, double the stats of all minions in your deck. This is a really picante card. Might be a little slow, but there are probably going to be some ways for you to just get straight up one-turn kills with a card like this. If they print any other charge minion, it can be a really scary card. Maybe a little too slow, but the fact that it's neutral and can go into any single class is really spicy. Then we have Scourge Rager, a 3-mana 5/4 with Reborn and a battle cry to die, and it's also an undead. Pretty great way to get some corpses early on, and if you could figure out how to resummon this minion, it's a pretty great stat line with Reborn. Might be the best Rager we've seen so far, but I never thought that we would see the battle cry to die. Great card. We have Infected Peasant, a 2-mana 2/1 with a death rattle to summon a 2/2 undead peasant. Pretty great way to get some corpses. Also gives you a pretty easy undead target if you need it. Might be a pretty decent neutral in some kind of decks. We have Street Sweeper, a 4-mana 2/2 battle cry, deal 2 damage to all other minions. Seems like a pretty good board clear in itself if you're going for a late game strategy in a class that doesn't have a lot of great board clears. This feels like it should be used quite a bit. Might actually be one of the best neutrals we've seen in a while. We then have Boneflinger, a 2-mana 2/3 undead battle cry. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, deal 2 damage. This is a very interesting battle cry, and I feel like there is a bunch of ways to manipulate this. Is it good enough to run into a deck? I'm not sure. 2 mana to deal 2 damage and get a 2/3 might be a little slow. We move on to Sun Fury Clergy, a 3-mana 2/4 battle cry, restore 3 health to all friendly characters. Mana Thirst 6, restore 6 health instead. So you're probably like, Rarran, what is Mana Thirst? Once you get to 6 mana crystals, you get the additional effect. So if you play this card at 3 mana, you're only going to restore 3 health to all friendly characters. But if you get to 6 mana crystals, this does 6 to all friendly characters. That's a lot of healing at 6 mana. Will this card see play? I mean, it's a pretty good neutral heal. Another example of Mana Thirst is with Silvermoon Sentinel, a 3-mana 2/5 with Taunt. Not that great for 3 mana, but if you do end up getting to 8 mana crystals, you gain +2/+2 and Divine Shield. For 3 mana, that's a pretty great minion. It might be a little bit too slow. At least it makes this card a lot nicer to top deck if you ever run it and you get to 8 mana. Last but not least, we have the class card showcase today for the expansion. We have 5 mana, Deal with the Devil for Demon Hunter, summon 2 3/3 Fell Fiends with Lifesteal. If your deck has no minions, summon another. This card on its own is pretty decent. If you're running a spell Demon Hunter, this card can be absolutely bonkers. It's a 5 mana 9/9 with Lifesteal. So I'm gonna guess that they're gonna be supporting some kind of spell Demon Hunter this expansion. Otherwise, I don't see this card actually seeing play. We have Nerubian Flyer for Druid, a 2-mana 2/3 undead battle cry. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, summon a 2/2 Nerubian. This card is a little bit better in some kind of aggro druid. Probably be a lot easier to have an undead die on turn 1 to get a bunch of stats. But even if you play this on turn 3, it's not the worst card in the world. We have Arcane Quiver for Hunter, 2 mana, discover a spell from your deck. If it's arcane, give it spell damage +1. I believe this is the first time that we have seen spell damage being granted in hand. Based on this card alone, we could probably guess that Arcane Spell School will probably be the focus of Hunter this expansion, and I'm pretty excited to see what the rest of the cards look like, because if we're getting spell damage in hand, what else could they be doing? But overall, seems like a pretty great card. For Mage, we have Arcane Defenders, an 8 mana arcane spell, summon 2 5/6 golems with Taunt, and they have the text, can't be targeted by spells and hero powers. Those are some pretty big meatballs, and they could be really annoying for your opponent to deal with. Overall, if you're playing some kind of big spell mage, this could be very good at it. We also have Arcane Bolt, which is a 1 mana spell for Mage, deal 2 damage, and with Mana Thirst 8, it will deal 3 damage instead. This looks like it's absolutely perfect to go in some kind of late game combo finisher. Spending 1 mana to deal 3 damage is pretty great, and there's probably going to be a bunch of ways to actually buff this card. We'll have to see what the other cards look like. We have for Quell the Loss, 2 mana paladin spell, give a friendly minion +3 attack and give your hero to attack this turn. It's also a holy spell. If you play a 1-mana minion and you get to play this on turn 2, that is absolutely ridiculous. Will probably be a really good card for Paladin. One of Paladin's legendaries, Blood Matriarch Liadrin, 2-mana 3/2. After you summon a minion with less attack than this, give it Divine Shield and Rush. You obviously want to buff Liadrin a lot in order for you to play almost any minion and give it Rush and Divine Shield. Will this card be too niche? We'll have to wait and see, but that is a very, very spicy effect. We have Shaman's Unliving Champion, a 3-mana 3/2 battle cry. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, summon 2 3/2 zombies. It is also an undead. Pretty great overall in some kind of evolve deck. It also works well in some kind of tempo deck that could be a lot of stats if you get the full value for this on turn 3. It'll be interesting to see what Shaman actually ends up going for this expansion, but at the moment, it could be a pretty good card in a vacuum. And finally, for Warrior, we have Silver Fury Stalwart. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. 6-mana 4/8 Taunt and Rush. Can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. This is kind of just a big boy who will make your opponent's life a little bit more miserable if they can't answer it. Again, we'll have to see what the archetypes are for the class, but could be a pretty decent card. And finally, Embers of Strength, a 2-mana warrior spell. Summon 2 1/2 guards with taunt. Mana thirst 6, give them +1/+2, and it's a fire spell. For 2 mana, this card is okay. We actually see a pretty close card with this for Druid at the moment, but if you do end up getting to 6 mana crystals, that is a little bit better of a card. Again, I don't know if this card will see play. It'll be interesting to see what archetype this actually fits into, but that so far is what Warrior is getting. Let me know what you think of Death Knight, and also if you enjoy Hearthstone, check out some of my other videos. There's some amazing ones on this channel.